hand right down here. I've only got one number one here. Just quick second. Water, I just opened up this bottle. Okay. Pour it into this cup. There's no hole in this cup. I put a little powder in the bottom before you came in. Thank you very much. Let's hear it. Most of you have touched this stuff before. Someone go your aunt that put it in diapers. Got it now? Got it. Why it's in diapers? I only have lived that long. Okay, are you ready with my slides? Hi, I'm Steve Burrow, a member of the MAPS committee, and it's so good to see live people. Okay, can you start the first slide? And there's a little animation for this. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, just wait. along with that, and all. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? You can read these. Done? Next slide. Okay, next slide. Yeah, this is the 100th anniversary of MJC. I think we started celebrating it several months ago. I want to point out that MJC is a strong supporter of science outreach, including this program, as well as the Science Colloquium, the Great Valley Museum, and we also host almost every year the Science Olympiad. I see there the two leaders of the Stanislaus County Science Olympiad are present. Thank you for coming. Okay, next slide. This is the MAPS committee. These people all are volunteers, and they work very hard. I want to especially thank our chairperson, Catherine Tripp. It's been a hard 2 years, and she's brought us through it. Okay, if you have any comments you want to make about MAPS, any speakers you want us to invite, talk to one of these people, and I'm sure they'll try and arrange it. Next slide. MAPS even had a float the Christmas parade. You'll notice in the second slide, our president, Dr. B, who will be up here for a little while, was actually part of the marching group in that parade. Next slide. There are two more MAPS presentations this semester. Unfortunately, they were scheduled before we knew it would be possible to have live ones, but take advantage of these on Zoom. The first one is on glaciers in the Sierra Nevada. I've heard this talk, or at least an earlier version of it. He is very good. He knows what's going on. He's a ranger from Yosemite, I believe. And you'll find out what's going on with our own glaciers. The second one is on a cave in Africa. One of our own faculty has talked about this before, but this is one of the other investigators in that research, a cave where they found bones that are contributing to our knowledge of evolution. Next slide. We also have a science colloquium, 3:15 on Wednesday, some Wednesdays, so pay attention to the schedule. There's a couple more coming up. And excuse me, the topics are up there. Next slide. Museum. If you haven't ever been to the museum, you really should go. I have a hunch that I'm speaking to the choir here, but you're the kind of people that would go. But everybody should go there. It's one of the unique opportunities in Modesto. It's a great family place. A lot of exhibits on the Great Valley. And right now there's a special exhibit in the lobby on art. You can sort of see it in the image. Take advantage of that. It'll be there until April 23rd. Incidentally, I think it's still a policy. If you join as a family, you get a pass that lets you into many museums, not just in this state, but across the country. I think it's $130. The director of the Great Valley Museum is here somewhere tonight. How much is it, Arnold? Can you hear me? 120. There you go. The biggest bargain you can get in Modesto. Next slide. There are many climate change organizations. If you're so moved, especially after the panel discussion, you want to become an activist. These are some of the organizations in our area. If you talk to any one of the committee members, they'll make some recommendations. Next slide. Okay, our program tonight, you'll know, features a meteorologist from Channel 3. I'll get to him in a minute. And this is an outstanding panel. And the students who are sitting over here, it took a lot of courage to do this. So we're looking forward to a great discussion tonight. Next slide. Dirk is actually from Central California in Lodi, so he's one of us. You probably have all seen him on Channel 3, mainly during the day, I think, and on weekends. He's really a personable guy, and very importantly, he is a meteorologist. He has a degree in meteorology. That's something that we were talking before. Maybe a third of the weather people on television have degrees, so he knows what he's talking about. He's not reading a script. And another reason we invited him is he's extremely interested in education. I just found out a little while ago he actually teaches at American River College occasionally on meteorology. So we couldn't have found a better qualified person to do something that MAPS is always trying to do, which is to raise the level of science literacy in our area. Well, you'll hear more about what Dirk does, but we're very fortunate to have somebody of this caliber here in Modesto. Next slide. Very quickly, Dr. B, I'm not going to pronounce his name, maybe he'll do it for you. But he is, actually, he's the first full-time president. We had 250 MAP stuff. He's the first full-time president that's been willing to do MAP stuff. I think they're willing. That has come, actually. And so we're really excited about that. Two of the young women panelists, Morgan Haydock is at MJC, and Abigail McKinney from Enoch. Really, give them a lot of credit for being here. Jumping the gun here because it hasn't been officially announced, but Morgan was just voted the outstanding, excuse me, young woman in Stanislaus County. Finally, a previous MAP speaker, Jeff Baroka from Lawrence Livermore Lab, is an atmospheric scientist. So if you have any really technical questions, he'll be the person that will answer. Dirk will also serve on the panel, so you can ask questions about what Dirk does also. And now, without further ado, on the count of three, would you please welcome Dirk? Say, welcome, Dirk. 1, 2, 3.
Whether the weather's cold, whether the weather is hot, we'll be together whatever the weather, whether we like it or not, right? All right, so thank you for that wonderful introduction and for the nostalgia of when I had hair. To see that on the big screen, it brings back a lot of memories. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a little bit, this is quite actually a grand venue. I'm used to being in classrooms or auditoriums. I usually teach or talk to kids at elementary schools. Occasionally, I will go to high schools or middle schools. And I do teach also at American River College. And unfortunately, I've had to do it via Zoom the past 2 years. And while that's very convenient, as a teacher, I really miss being able to look at my students in the eyes, to be able to see the response that I get when we talk about the subject, to see when the light goes on and you see that I get it in a moment and they're excited about learning. I miss that. That's part of why I got into teaching. The other reason I like teaching is I like to learn things. And growing up, I loved all the sciences. I started out when I was little. I would have been about 3 years old, and my parents had this old encyclopedia set that everything was black and white. But in the middle, there were these colored plates that they had, colored pictures, and my eyes were drawn to those. And the first plates that I fell in love with were fish. They had all these fish that were freshwater fish, saltwater fish, and I remember, again, as a 3-year-old, memorizing all the fish that were on those colored plates. I was fascinated with those fish. Also helped my dad look for fishing. He would bring the fish home, and I would play with the I love to learn about our world. We have a marvelous world. This is a magnificent planet that we're on right now. And there's so many things that we can discover and learn. And science is a great window to that, where we can think about what's going on, learn about it as much as we can, and find out we don't know anything because there's more to learn. There's always so much more to learn. And I love that process. So by teaching about a subject like the weather, it allows me to learn more about it. It's amazing. I sometimes will go into a kindergarten class and they will ask me a question that I'll go, oh wow, I've never thought of that before. I'm just a kindergartner teaching me about the weather. It's amazing to see young minds and how they can think through things, and how important it is for those of us that are educators to inspire them, to allow them to think and to ask questions, and to not say, well, oh, that's a dumb question. That's the worst thing you can say to a kid. Is that. So inspire them to think and to learn and to just enjoy this world that we have. So what I wanted to do is I want to show you a video. We'll show you the video. This is of weather.
Oh, my phone.
it is. Why I love the weather. That is not why I like speaking. Get out of its field. There, that's better. All right, just unplug it. To me, my fascination with weather started with the occasional thunderstorm that would come during the summertime when we have a monsoon that would make its way over the Sierra Nevada mountains. I love that. It was exciting to me to see the lightning and to hear the thunder. I remember storms that would come through and the rain pounding on my window. It was exciting to me. I just thought that was fascinating. From there, I remember the floods that we've had here in California. I remember the droughts that we've had here in California. We've had some extremes. And it's fascinating to me when I left. I love the snow. When I went to places where there was snow, they called me the crazy Californian because I would get so excited. It'd snow and it would snow. I've been in storms where we've had 2 feet of snow, and I'm excited about digging people out of their, with their cars and making them do what they can do. I mean, there's just so much excitement that can be had with weather and the power. I've been in a hurricane before. And to see trees getting toppled by 90-mile-an-hour winds was quite impressive. And because of that, and my love of just seeing the sheer force and power and the varieties of weather, that led me to my field of meteorology. And I wanted to learn why it did these things. And it's been an exciting ride ever since. And the more I'm in it, the longer I'm in it, the more I get to learn. And that's what's exciting to me. So, the weather is constantly changing, and it impacts our lives in many ways. But again, the learning and the understanding of it helps, I think. And the process of forecasting has been an integral part of us being able to prepare for weather events that might come our way. It's been interesting to see the advances in meteorology and forecasting, especially with numerical forecasting or computer models, and the computing technology that has helped that along. And it's almost a detriment to forecasters nowadays because of social media and our wonderful phones. All you have to do is just look up on an app and you get a forecast for where you are. The expectations have changed quite a bit. I've been forecasting now for 26 years. I've been forecasting. And back when I started, people would be excited if you could actually get it right, if you forecasted rain and it happened during that 24-hour period. Nowadays, that's changed. Now people want to know the exact minute that it's going to start raining, and they want to know the exact minute when it's going to stop raining. And so the pressure's been put on. And even though technology has advanced so much, it gets harder and harder because the expectations keep growing more and more. But it's fun. It's fun to do. And in fact, that's part of one of my favorite parts of the day when I'm working in the morning is to sit down about an hour and a half to 2 hours before the news starts and just work on a forecast. And just looking at the computer models and trying to figure out what the weather's going to be like. Not only for that day, but the week ahead. And it's always interesting to see the changes that take place. How at one point it looks like a big storm's coming a week away, and then you get 3 or 4 days out, and it disappears. Those things happen. The farther out you look, the harder it is to forecast those storms. But that's just kind of a window into my world. So what I also had, I brought with me, because we love to learn, right? I thought it'd be fun, and I made a quiz. So I want to talk about California extremes. This is our weather quiz for Golden State. You may think you know California. But do you really know California? Let's see. First question. Where was the greatest and how much greatest 24-hour rainfall total? Thinking about it, you might think, oh, it's going to be along the northern coast because they get a lot of rain up there, don't they? Think maybe the mountains, because of the mountains creating their own lift and creating the rain. Well, you'd be close if you thought that. But would you have guessed Southern California? Actually, at Ogie's Camp, San Gabriel Mountains, near Los Angeles in Los Angeles County, they received 25.83 inches in a 24-hour period. Can you imagine that much water coming down in here? That's a tremendous. They definitely had some flooding. There was definitely some flash floods associated with that much water coming down in a short period of time. That one kind of blows the mind. How about the biggest snowstorm? Obviously, that's going to be the mountains. Northern Sierra, Southern Sierra, or maybe Central Sierra. So the biggest snowstorm was actually almost a 2-week period that they had of snow near Donner Summit at the snow lab that they have there, where they received 186 inches of snowfall. That's equivalent to 15 and a half feet of snow. That was in 1982. That's not even, it happened in my lifetime. Coldest temperature in California, where was that recorded? Was it a low spot? Was it a high spot? Maybe a high spot. Boca, Nevada, which is actually just a little bit down the road from Truckee. On January 20th, 1937, 45 below. It can get pretty cold up there, especially when you have, Truckee is kind of like in a basin, so you get that cold air that just settles in. It's at an elevation of over 5,500 feet. But a cold temperature. But recently, just the other day, yesterday, we had a record temperature in Lake Tahoe at 6 below, so we can have that kind of cold. And speaking of cold, again, my kids think I'm crazy too, because I was driving my daughter home across Nevada. This was in December. We had another, again, just this high pressure with cold air associated with it sitting over the high plains, or the high desert there in Nevada. And we were driving along, and temperatures kept dropping and dropping and dropping. It finally got down to about 4 below. And I'm like, oh, we've got to pull over. Because there was fog, there was some ice fog. It was so cool. The formations of ice that formed on the fences, plants that were out there, there were some power poles, and I had to stop and take pictures. My daughter was like, you're crazy, what are you doing? It's 4 below outside. But it was fun. I'm also the parent that took my kids on storm walks. So when we get a storm, I said, get your rain gear on, let's go out in it. So we go tromping around out in the wind and the rain, and it was a blast. We had a lot of fun doing things like that. So coldest temperature, hottest temperature. We should all know this one, right? Because not only is it the hottest temperature ever recorded in California, it's actually the hottest temperature ever recorded on the planet. They took that old record, the old record from Libya and tossed it. It wasn't accurate. So we still have that record here, Death Valley, Furnace Creek, 134 degrees, set back July 10th, 1913. And one of the reasons why it can get so hot there is because of the elevation. The elevation, 190 feet elevation. What's interesting, I've been to Death Valley. In fact, I've gone to Death Valley for the sole purpose of experiencing hot temperatures, which again, you probably think is stupid. But I just wanted to do it. So I went there, it was last August, and we went and were able to experience a day of 122 degree heat. It was awesome. Would I want to stay in it? No, I wouldn't want to stay in it, but it was neat to experience for a little while. And so I got to do that. So elevation, that's critical, because you think about it, and you have all this atmosphere that's pressing, and when you have pressure, you have heat. You know, you compress the air, it starts to heat things up. And so the lower you go, the warmer it's going to get. And so that's And it's amazing, again, you go down into lower elevation, that water is the lowest point there in Death Valley. And I believe it's a little over 300 feet below sea level. And you can be down there, again, we were there in August, you can be experiencing 122-degree heat. And then what do? You go driving up into the mountains, and I went high Telescope Peak, which is 11,000 feet. It was comfortable. You have 120-degree temperatures at the bottom, and you're up in elevation, and it was, I'd say temperatures were probably in the 70s. So that's just, I don't know, stuff like that is fascinating to me. I love it. Foggiest place. Well, if you grew up in the Central Valley, it's got to be here, right? Or if you grew up in the Bay Area, it's got to be here. Well, you're closer on the coast. In the valley, we've had the longest stretch that we've had here, and I remember it was back in 1980, I think it was 85. We had a stretch of 19 days of dense fog in the Central Valley. And so you think, okay, that's pretty foggy, but no. Point Reyes averages 200 foggy days a year. Right into foggy. It's actually the second foggiest place in the United States. And we've got it right here in California. What about the strongest winds? Strongest winds. The strongest winds, I think Mount Washington. That's not here though. We have the strongest winds. 2017, February 20, 199-mile-an-hour winds in Alpine Meadows at Ward Peak, which sits over 8,600 feet. So you can see right there in the central section of the Sierra, that's where a lot of the extreme weather takes place. Well, that's one of the reasons why that happens. The other reason is because it's a point where you have a lot of instruments. You've got I-80 that goes over, you've got the snowtail sites, you've got the ski resorts that are all right there, and so of course we're collecting data from that point. There could be areas in the Sierra where it's more extreme, it's just that you don't have anything measuring the data up there. So that's one of the reasons why. And so those are the estate extremes. In California, it's just great to forecast for. Again, everybody always says, oh, you forecast in California, how boring is that? Sometimes it can be, but we also get some exciting weather here. And I enjoy that. I enjoy that's something that just our weather department at KCRA, we get excited when we see a storm coming. It's so much fun. It's fun to see Mark Finan. If you've ever watched Channel 3 and seen Mark Finan, he doesn't usually show a lot of emotion. But when we got a storm coming, he's got a big smile on his face. It's exciting. And so we get all excited about that, and we have something to talk about. And especially during the summertime, it gets pretty old after you're talking about it's going to be at 99 or is it going to be 102? You know, that's your forecast range for dealing with it. But it's been great. I've been at KCRA for 24 years forecasting. And it's been a great ride to see the changes there, just to be in that workplace. It's a great place to work. I enjoy the people. That's what really makes it so great. It's the wonderful people that I get to work with there. So it's been a fun ride, and I hopefully will be able to stay there until I retire. I don't have any plans to go anywhere else. This is home for me, and they seem to let me stick around. So as long as they let me stick around, I'll stick around. I enjoy that. But so that's about what I have as far as my presentation about me, about the weather, about forecasting in California. And I'd love to take any questions when we have the panel. And we'd have to wait for them, or we'll do questions now about what's in the way. Okay, so we'll hold off on the questions until we have our panel come up. So I'm done. I'm going to switch that back.
Am I on? Is this no? Turn me on, please. You're on. Come on. Okay, I better be careful what I say. Thank you very much, Dirk. Let's hear it for Dirk. That was... You know which station you'll now watch for your weather reports, right? Anyway, we now will bring up Dr. Bihu and the panel. They will each introduce themselves, and then they will be given questions. And if you'd like to interact, there are microphones up here too, so you can ask your own questions. Again, Dr. B and the panel.
Good evening. Is it on? Yeah, it is. Thank you for the presentation, Dirk. Let's give him a big hand. So my first task, as Steve told, is to tell you how I pronounce my last name. You got the easy option, that's Dr. B. In my part of the world, it's said Bandyopadhyay. And believe it or not, my name, first name and last name both, in my part of the world is as common as a John Doe. In my grade 4 class of 50 students, there were 4 Shantanu Bandyopadhyays. It's as common as that. But once I come here, then I have this distinguished feature that nobody gets this name. Anyway, it's my pleasure to be here this evening. As Steve said that I'm supposed to be the first full-time president to be attending it, and I still cannot figure out why is that so. Because as a college president, we have different jobs that we tackle. Some parts of the job we enjoy, some days we feel that we are not paid enough to do what we do. But these kind of events, this is where we come close to the community, people like you, interact with folks, and this is a fun event. So these are really something that I look forward to. I can interact with the community and have some fun and no stress. So this is great to be here, and I am looking forward to spending a few more minutes getting to know our panelists here a little bit more. I would let the panelists introduce themselves, and I have some special words for them. Then we will go through some structured questions. And after that, if time permits, we will take some questions from the audience as well. So at this point of time, I would hand it over to our panelists to introduce yourself. They already know Dirk. So we'll go to you, Jeff.
All right, can you hear me? Is this on? Okay, great. Well, I sort of have a few prepared comments here, but I'd like to just kind of riff on some of the things that I've observed since I've been here. First of all, Dirk gave a wonderful presentation on the fascinating world of weather that we live in. And you can think of the climate as sort of the average of the weather. So if the climate changes, the weather changes too. And often we feel climate change through changes in the weather. So hopefully we'll have some discussion on that topic that I spent many long and wonderful years studying. I originally am a product of a community college system in the Phoenix, Arizona area, and then I went to a state university, Arizona State University, where I studied meteorology and double majored in geography and math. And geography was where they had the meteorology department over there, but I was really interested in weather forecasting and climate, so I double majored also in math and studied both topics. And so I'm involved in computer simulation, much as Dirk talked about. That's how we do a lot of numerical weather forecasting these days, predicting the weather, and folks like Dirk rely on those products to provide them with information that they then combine with their wisdom and other tools to generate even better weather forecasts than a computer could by themselves. So don't worry, you're not out of work yet, because you know. I took a kind of circuitous route to get to where I am in front of you up here today. When I was at Arizona State, the program that I worked at was very skeptical of climate change. This was back in the early 90s. There was still quite a bit of skepticism about it. The data weren't necessarily as conclusive as people would have hoped. And so I was sort of steeped in a culture where there was a lot of skepticism. I went to graduate school and studied direct pertinent part of the climate system, the Arctic pack ice, and how it's been changing. I had a data set from an icebreaker ship that was moored into the surface of the ice, floated around for a year, all kinds of measurements so we could characterize the entire energy budget. And that really got me thinking about climate change. So that's what I got my PhD in. Then when I came to California, I did a lot of different things. I did some air quality stuff, I did some renewable energy stuff. And about 5 years ago, I had an opportunity to teach a class in climate change at San Jose State University. And so I brushed up on my climate change chops and was really amazed at how much things had changed since I formally studied the topic, 15 or so years prior. And it really made me realize that this is probably the most important thing that we need to be talking about. So I take every opportunity that I can to talk to people in whatever forum, because I think it's incredibly important. But you know, there are some scary scenarios that we can think about with climate change. People talk about gloom and doom and how bad it's getting, and there is some rationale for that. But I also want to leave with a spirit of optimism, because you know, one of the first quote slides that Steve put up, there was a quote from Marie Curie. If we understand things better, we don't have to fear them as much. So here's the understanding.
Very well said, Jeff. Now let's go to Morgan. Morgan Haydock is an MJC student and the Community Justice Advisory Network is an area. She's the Community Justice Advisory Network Youth Coordinator. She received the Outstanding Young Woman of the Year 2022 award in Stanislaus County. Thank you for being here tonight, Morgan. Would you take a few minutes to introduce yourself, please?
Can you hear me? My name is Morgan Haydock. I'm a sophomore at the Junior College studying both biology and political science. I'm student representative for the campus's sustainability task force, and I work for a climate organization called Climate Justice Action Now, where my main focus is actually on getting young people involved so that they can have their voices be heard when it comes to climate change and the solutions we're trying to find in our community. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here tonight to talk to all of you.
Thank you, Morgan. Our fourth panelist is Abigail McKinney. She is the managing editor of inaugural year of Enoch's Eagle Eye website and president of their Environment Club.
Yes, hi, thank you for having me. As Dr. Wu mentioned, yes, I am a student at Enoch High School. I'm currently a junior and I'm president of our school's Environmental Club. And my goal, since I'm still very early on in my education of climate change, is just to spread awareness to my peers. I think that the most important part of this whole process is to encourage hope and about climate change and about our future and work to make that change through education on my campus.
Thank you for being here, Abigail and Morgan especially. I really admire both of you coming here today. So here's the first topic or first question that I have, and this question is for you, Dirk. There are gradual climate heating from greenhouse gas emissions, and then there are these tail-end events. And tail-end events are described as the shape of the normal distribution. I'm a statistician by trade, so when you have the normal distribution, it goes like this, the bell curve, and the tails, one on the right-hand side or the left-hand side, those are the events that happen, but not as frequently as it's happening in the middle. Many times we do not pay attention to those tail events because they have a low probability of occurring. They occur once in a while. For example, the last time we had a drought, very severe, maybe 100 years back, or as you were talking about, huge snow event that happened 100 years back, things like that. We don't pay attention to those events that frequently. The question is, what sort of tail-end events can we expect to see here in the Central Valley in the next decade or so, given that greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise?
I think that we are going to see still the same events that we have in the past. I mean, we are prone to droughts, and we can have some very severe droughts over periods of years. And to oppose that, it's always funny, I get asked, what are the most, I guess, dangerous or impactful weather events that we have here in California, and they oppose each other. They're opposites. You have the drought and you have the flooding. One of the fascinating things that I find about flooding, and especially with the study of atmospheric rivers that continues to grow, this is an area that we've seen a lot more research in lately, is the pattern of weather that you have a stream of atmospheric moisture that head right towards California. We used to call them pineapple expresses, but now we have this term atmospheric river. We actually experienced a pretty strong one in October. We had record rainfall. We had over 6 inches of rainfall associated with an atmospheric event, an atmospheric river event. And I think that when we have, especially where we live in a valley, And all of the water from the watersheds that come down the western slope of the Sierra, the eastern side of the coastal mountains, all that water that comes into the valley, through the San Joaquin Valley watershed and the Sacramento watershed, goes through the delta and goes out, other than being seepage into the ground. But all of that water travels out through the Golden Gate. And when you have an atmospheric river event, like we have in the past, all that water backs up, and you have the water system back up. And then the levees that we built are prone to break, and we have spillage over those and break through. We have flooding. We've had floods in the past where the Central Valley has turned into a lake that's been 50 miles wide and over 100 miles long. That's something that no levee is going to be able to hold back. All the reservoirs that we have are great to have, and they help us. But when we have an event like we talked about here, those aren't going to hold. And so flooding is a big problem, and drought. So I say that those are the two things that are going to be a problem continuing in California. We're going to have those extreme events.
So I will follow up to that. Do you have a comment on that, Jeff?
I could, just to connect things up with climate again, these are weather events, but the frequency and intensity of occurrence of these atmospheric rivers is what defines climate change. And it's interesting how, as you mentioned, we had record 24-hour rainfalls in Sacramento, and I believe San Francisco as well, in December. And then the spigot shut off, and we've been almost bone dry since then. And those kinds of changes, you might end up with the same amount of winter precipitation, although this year we're far below. We may catch up, but the point is, it's important also how it falls, because these falling things, your reservoirs can hold a couple of these events. And we almost lost Oroville Dam a couple of years ago. So what's going to happen when we get 3 or 4 or 5 of these atmospheric river events within a short enough time period? So those are things just to keep in mind.
Well, I have a follow-up on that, and we're talking about dam and a lot of rainfall and so on and so forth. But if you look at Cal Fire's massive fire situations in the last 100 years, probably the top 15 or 14 of them in the last 100 years occurred in the space of last 20 years or in this century, if not more. Probably 15 of them happened there. So fires and droughts are becoming more and more common. And as we say that there is no fire season anymore in California, or fire seasons are getting elongated. So on that front, as a meteorologist, Dirk, are you noticing changes in weather patterns that are consistent with those predicted with a warming pattern? And if a warming trend continues, how will the weather patterns affect the urban and rural residents of Stanislaus County in particular?
Well, I mean, if you look at what would typically happen, and again, I'm looking at it from the global view, but also as a forecaster, and so that Jeff would have a better explanation of things and be able to be a little bit more specific climatologically. But when you have a disparity in temperatures between the equator and the poles, you are going to have more extreme events. You're going to have the jet stream that's going to flow at greater amplitude. So you're going to have areas of high pressure, because that's how the Earth rules itself. The Earth wants to have balance. And the way that it does that is you have air traveling north towards the pole, and you have cold air traveling south towards the equator. And that's how it tries to balance itself out. So when you have that disparity in temperatures and it's out of balance, you're going to have more extreme jet stream patterns that would try to compensate for that. So you can have more extreme events. One of the things that's just a struggle to deal with here in California is the Pacific High. Pacific High is a mound of air that sits off in the eastern Pacific, and it helps to steer the jet stream, or it steers the weather pattern so that it can make for some very dry conditions here in California. And that's when we have a drought situation like we have now. We have this really high pressure that continues to form off the coast of California, keeping the storms away from us. And so you're going to see more of that. So you'll have areas where you're going to have drier conditions. You're going to have areas where you're going to be wetter conditions, because where you have the drought, you're going to have the opposite effect if you're downstream. So look what's happening on the East Coast. So you look at the West Coast, we're getting dry, except for the Pacific Northwest. They get like all the tail end of those systems as they go through. But then you look at the East Coast, and what do they get? storm after storm after storm. You're seeing that happen this year. They just had another storm come through just yesterday and today. And before that, you had several nor'easters that have come through, dropping records amounts of snowfall. And so that would, I mean, if you look at the pattern, those are the kind of things that I would expect to see.
Any other comment from Jeff or Abigail or Morgan?
I'll jump in maybe with just a little bit more of the connection of climate and wildfire, since that seems to be on everybody's minds, as it should be. There's a lot that goes into creating the wildfire-prone conditions that we have in the western United States. Part of it is that there are warmer temperatures, and warmer temperatures evaporate more water from the soil, and they cause the trees to transpire more water from their leaves. So that ends up with drier trees, drier soils, and the trees in this context can become more stressed and more prone to disease, which weakens them and allows them to become more susceptible to things like bark beetles. The bark beetle is another consequence of warming winter temperatures because it doesn't get cold enough to kill the beetle larvae as effectively as it used to, so you end up with more bark beetles ganging up on weakened and stressed trees. A third sort of factor in all of this is the change in the timing of precipitation in the winter towards the peak accumulation of water being earlier in the winter season, leading to longer dry periods in the spring and summer months, and often later onset of rainfall. The worst fire that we had in state history, the Camp Fire that took out Paradise a few years ago, started on November 8th. Nobody would have thought of that as being fire season, but as Dr. B mentioned, we're now in a regime where we don't necessarily have fire season anymore. So those are just a couple connections between fire and climate that I think is important for people to know about.
Okay, any comment? Morgan, have you? No, not yet. Okay. All right. So let's talk about a little bit of what can we do about these situations. Let's say this is specifically for you, Jeff. If we fail to contain greenhouse gas emissions, most who live in the United States and who are 50 years or older will not probably feel the direct effects, since the severest effects will most likely take hold after 2050, when many of that generation would not be with us anymore. But those who are under 50, especially those who are below 30, they would be here to see those days and face a very uncertain world where things we take for granted nowadays will be threatened or will disappear. For example, we have 490 ppm up from a baseline of 280 ppm. So do you agree with this assessment by climate experts that it is going to be a more volatile situation, particularly for those who are younger, because of the greenhouse gas emissions? Is that your assessment goes in line with the meteorologist's assessment? And what sort of things will be threatened or will disappear because of this global warming, if it so happens?
So that's a rich question, but I'll try to take it on in a reasonable amount of time. Certainly there's much more consensus about the climate change detection, attribution, and prediction. So let me unpack those words. Detecting climate change is a tough problem because you have in any human lifetime a relatively small number of events, and our historical records don't go back more than about 100 to 150 years for large parts of the planet. So trying to detect that we're actually changing climate, that what we're seeing is not explainable by normal distributions, has been a difficult problem, but we surmounted that problem. And there's consensus now that climate change is unequivocal. Now the next issue is attribution. What's causing it? Is it natural processes, or is it human activities and their consequences? And so you need to understand natural causes of climate variability, and you also need to have the physics and understanding of how the emission of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere can lead to specific measurable outcomes. Different layers of the atmosphere can heat by different amounts. You might expect different distributions of rainfall. For example, a warmer atmosphere holds more water vapor, so that when you do have rain events, oftentimes you get larger amounts of precipitation in the same time interval. So, some people would say, well, how can climate change explain everything? It's getting rainier in places, it's getting drier in places. But the thing is that there is a fingerprint. And a lot of the people that work at Livermore Lab, where I work, actually are looking into these fingerprints of human activities on climate change. And there's been a lot of published literature, and I would say the consensus is extremely strong. And at the same time, we're getting better at our abilities to predict future climate, partly through better understanding of past climate, both events and forcing mechanisms that cause those events, but also we have more reliable computer simulations. They're not perfect, and as everyone's saying in sort of the COVID prediction era, all models are bad, some are useful. We really do have some useful models, and we can make some fairly confident assessments of what we think is going to happen in the future. So this gets to the good news, the bad news part of the question, which is what do we have to lose? Well, and I say this with a straight face, we have everything to lose, because there are tipping points in the climate system that can cause cascading bad outcomes for ecosystems, for all of civilization, and most of life on Earth. It's happened before. We've had mass extinctions in Earth's past, and we found that many of those were actually driven by climate change, not humans. We weren't around then, but there were volcanoes that outgassed carbon dioxide into the atmosphere for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, built up an accumulation of greenhouse gases that caused enough warming and enough disruption to take out most life on the planet. So there's a precedent for it, and we could get there, but we don't have to get there. And that's what I think is important. The public is coming to realize now that the climate change is real, and it is caused primarily by us. But that's an empowering statement, because that means that we can reverse it, we can mitigate it, we can make the world better. And there are lots of technologies now that are available to us. Along with the advances in the science, we now have the technologies to produce energy, transportation, perform agriculture in ways that are much more sustainable. And that's kind of a tough pill to swallow. There are economic consequences, and it gets wrapped up in all kinds of ways, but it's not like we don't have a path out of this. We do have the knowledge. So maybe it's time to kind of steer the conversation over a little bit towards what are the young people thinking about? What are you worried about? What are you optimistic about? What are you hopeful for? And I'd like to field some questions along those lines, or listen to you all have a discussion about that, because that's really, I think, where the conversation needs to go. It's not about protecting and contributing. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about looking towards solutions and figuring out a way to get there.
Well said. So, taking a segue from there, as you said, that let's hear from the young people who are going to be inheriting this situation in 2050, those who are below 30. I'm specifically looking at two of you, Morgan and Abigail. You both are well under 30 years of age, and I imagine that you and your peers may be frightened by an uncertain future. So how concerned are you and your peers about climate change? Morgan?
I know I personally, this is one of the biggest issues I know my generation is facing. In just time that I've been living in the Central Valley, we've seen extreme drought, high temperatures. And I think that I'm not alone in my concern. A recent Pew Research study actually showed that individuals in Gen Z are more likely than any other generation to make climate change their number one priority, the number one issue that they want to see addressed. Which is why I think you see a lot of young people getting more and more involved in the movement. So suffice to say, yes, I am very concerned, but I think there is a lot of hope. As Dr. Moroka said, we have solutions, we know what we need to do, and it's just a matter of joining together and making sure that those solutions actually happen.
That's very well said, very optimistic outlook. Abigail, what's your take on this topic?
I agree with Morgan. I think that climate change is an issue that our generation is extremely concerned with. It is an issue that our generation is very aware of, and we are at the point where we understand climate change, and now we're ready to move on to finding solutions and starting those solutions. And I think that, yes, we are concerned, but we are not a generation of fear. I think we are a generation of hope, as you said, but we are also a generation of change. We are ready to see that difference made, and I think that we are ready to take the steps necessary so that by 2050, we are making sustainable choices that are going to help reduce the impact of that.
Wonderful. So on that line, let's explore that a little bit more. We're talking about hope, optimism, and what we can do, because hope is not a good strategy. We all need to have a strategy to change things our way. If we just keep on hoping and praying, yeah, sometimes they may work or may not work. So on that line, and Jeff, I'll start with you on this part. What kind of initiatives do you think would help, in general, restricting the impact of climate change or reversing it or holding it steady overall? And more specifically, in Stanislaus County, what can we do in Stanislaus County to deal with the potential perilous impacts of climate change?
We have technological solutions that could be deployed today at scale, and that is the posture of the current administration. I think we've seen that time over time, deploy, solar, wind, and that can help. It's a necessary part of the solution, but it's not necessarily a sufficient part of the solution. A lot of other things need to come along with it, including maybe a little bit of luck to help. But there's a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that is going to be there for a very long time. The removal mechanisms for carbon dioxide are pretty slow. So at the same time that we're thinking about reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, there are technologies that can actually harvest carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They're, at this point, a little bit low on the technology curve. They're expensive. There aren't really markets for captured carbon. It's currently not penalized to emit carbon dioxide in a way that perhaps could be achieved in a more regulatory environment. Regulation is a bad word, but sometimes we need it. And so I think, among other things, there's a carbon fee and dividend program that is advocated for by a lot of people in this area, including the Citizens Climate Lobby, which some of the MAPS committee members and analysts are members. We have to be, I think, proactive on a few different fronts. To answer a question about Stanislaus County in particular, because I think this has been asked a few times, everyone's concerned with local impacts. I think hot, dry, and smoky is what we're looking at in the not too distant future, as we've seen in the last few years, if things don't change. So we need to be thinking about adaptation. So that's the act of securing ourselves against climate change is already sort of baked into the cake. If we took all the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere right away, we could reverse climate change. But since we can't do that, we're going to be living with the consequences of climate change for quite some time. But that doesn't mean that we can't, affect both mitigation, which is reducing root causes, as well as doing adaptation where it's needed. And so what does that mean in Stanislaus County in the Central Valley? We're an agricultural region. We rely on water. We rely on water storage and distribution. We have air quality issues. Thinking about how we store, transport water, preparing for these daily events that are going to get more extreme. We all know that there are agricultural practices, modifications that we can do using less water. We're going to probably, in this state, need to think about doing more controlled burns because we've got these accumulations of fuels in the forests. So we need to understand what the air quality impacts of those are going to be and how we can sort of right size and time those kinds of approaches. So it's I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question, but it's the problems really causing climate change are not usually addressed by local households. I mean, it's good to transition away as much as we can from our reliance on fossil fuels, but it's as important that we make sure that the big structural changes are made, and that's our national energy production facilities and the grid to move that around and to balance demand and supply, weather-dependent renewables are going up and down, integrating with battery storage and other kinds of things that we can do. We've got the brains, we've got the solutions, but this is a tough nut to crack. And it's job security. That's one way of looking at it.
Well, Abigail, you are the managing editor of your Eagle High website and president of the Environment Club. So if I could put this question a little bit differently to you, what kind of initiatives do you think can help Stanislaus County deal with climate change? From your environmental club, what kind of thoughts do you have or conversations do you have?
Well, I think that on a broader scale of things that we can do here in our community specifically is reducing fossil fuels, and that comes from two major things. One of those is improving, increasing, and normalizing public transportation, which is something that can pertain directly to schools. And so that is something that we want to help encourage and increase on our campus. In the environmental club specifically, we just work on educating our students and educating our peers so that they understand that the changes need to be made and that things like reducing fossil fuel emissions are what is going to help reduce the impacts of climate change.
I think understanding the problem is a very important part. Before we solve it, we need to understand what the ramifications of it. That's a great way of contextualizing it. So, Morgan, what's your thought on that area? What kind of initiatives do you think would help Stanislaus County deal with this climate change?
I agree with Abigail that public transportation is incredibly important when it comes to reducing emissions, especially considering how many people in the Central Valley commute out of the Central Valley on a daily basis. So access to reliable public transportation can make a huge difference with emissions here. I think a lot of policies have been talked about. One of the ones that I would say is important. There are 2 incinerators left in California to deal with waste. One of them is in the Central Valley. It's actually in our county, and that puts out a lot of emissions. And I think we need to start talking about how we deal with our waste and how we make sure that it's not adding to a crisis that we are already facing. But beyond specifically talking about policies, I think we've covered quite a few of them. I think we also need to talk about the fact that having policies that we want to see happen is great. But in order for it to happen, we have to make sure that our elected officials know that this is a priority. We have to make sure that they know that we expect them to initiate these policies. So I think it's incredibly important that as we focus on this problem, that we remember that we have to vote for people who will actually put this problem first so we can start addressing it.
So let's stay with you, Morgan, for a couple of minutes more. What motivated you to get involved and take action, and what has been the outcome of the action that you have done in this club?
Well, I would say my major motivation comes from my parents. I grew up in a household where I was encouraged to learn about current events and the things that are going on in the world and to ask questions about it. And that led me to know about climate change at a pretty young age and know what was going on and track it. And in my junior year of high school, I got the opportunity to actually take all of the things I had been thinking about for so many years and put them into action. I was asked to lead the environmental club at my high school. And it started very small. There were maybe 4 or 5 of us who were working on education of our peers. We did things like river cleanups to help make sure our community environment was healthy and safe. And that really blossomed into working more and more on climate change and climate-related issues. And I think one of the things that motivated me to continue my work in climate change, I was invited to a meeting of youth environmental leaders across the county. And being in a room with 20 other young people who saw this issue, who knew it was important and wanted to see change, really cemented in my mind the fact that we have to continue working on this. We can't not prioritize it. It has to be something that we continue to work on. And so that has been my major motivation, is people around me who I get to work with on a daily basis, who have so much hope for the future that we can create if we can all work together and get these solutions actually happen. In terms of what that action has resulted in, I was lucky to be able to lead a climate rally. It was virtually, it was during COVID, that brought together youth organizations from across California, but we also had a few from other states as well, to hear about all of the work that they have been doing. And a lot of what my action has focused on is trying to educate the community and making sure that people know what they can do to help with that crisis, specifically bringing young people in so that they know what's going on in the world that we are inheriting and what we can do about it.
I like your passion on this. So let's hear from Abigail. Now, what motivated you to get involved and take action, and what has been the outcome of that action?
Well, I honestly can't pinpoint a moment where I initially decided that climate change was an important issue. I think it's always been a part of the conversation. Like Morgan, I grew up in a household where we were encouraged to learn, and I grew up in a household with a mom who taught environmental science, and so climate change has always been a discussion, and learning more about it and seeing the impacts of it in the world and in our daily lives motivated me to want to make a difference and want to see a change. But even more than that, I realized that there needed to be a change, and I want to see a brighter future for my generation. I want to see a more sustainable future for my future kids and for my future friends and family, so that we can live in a more sustainable environment. And so through the environmental club, our school and my peers and I have been able to educate our students. I think, as we've emphasized, education is the first step in making sure that our generation learns enough about climate change to make the smart, sustainable solutions. And we have done things such as, as simple as outreach on social media, posting daily facts about climate change, reaching out to our students on campus and providing opportunities for them to get involved in community projects that teach about activism, whether it's river cleanups like Morgan mentioned, or activities here on campus. And our outcome has been a more educated and more involved generation of younger students who want to see the difference and want to see a sustainable future.
Excellent. I really appreciate your initiative and drive there, and the passion about this topic. So let's stir it up a little bit more and get into some controversial areas. And let's go to Dirk about this, to start this controversial conversation. Do we have an ethical obligation to leave the younger generation the climate that we and our grandparents enjoy?
Obviously, we want to leave things better than we found them. I mean, when I go camping, I want to leave no tricks. That's the whole goal. And so I would hope that we would want to make this a better world. In some respects, I think we have. In other respects, we haven't. And I think it's interesting listening to all of this to see, and it's a struggle. It's a struggle to get this message out. And I'm sitting here thinking about how can you win people's hearts and minds? How can you, well, first of all, education is an important part of that, of course, and sometimes the greatest impact you can have is with our youth, because they're just more willing to hear and to learn. But I just try to think of what is it that what could everybody agree about? And when I get into these conversations with others, of course, you have people that they don't believe in climate change, and others that they believe in climate change, and it's usually very politically centered. The things that we can all agree on, I don't know anybody on this planet that wants to breathe bad air, or polluted air. Nobody wants to drink polluted water. Nobody wants to hopefully hurt the planet. And so it's just a matter of incorporating this into that kind of conversation. Because that's something I think we can all agree on. And so we need to be able to find that kind of middle ground. And I think that's what we kind of separate a lot is everybody, well, you're too extreme with this, you're too extreme with that. And so we just need to be able to be persuasive and try to come in agreement with, okay, these are the things we want to do, and we can incorporate trying to reduce carbon emissions within that. I remember growing up here in the Central Valley when we had leaded gas, and we had just horrible exhaust that came out of the cars. Things have changed dramatically. I am a big fan of catalytic converters. I love them. The only problem is we don't have as many puggy days anymore. It's interesting with no burn days and with the reduced emissions from cars, the number of foggy days have gone down noticeably. We don't have as much fog, and there may be other factors involved with that too, but those are the big things that I attribute to the reduction in fog here in the Central Valley. And so we can have an impact on our environment, and we can have an impact for good. And I think we can all get behind certain things here and all push forward together. And it's a difficult topic.
It sure is a difficult topic. So from other panelists, Jeff, anything to add on what's our ethical obligation to leave this planet as a better place?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost difficult to answer that question because how could it not be? We have experienced a bounty of abundance in our natural capital. That is just an endowment that we undervalue. We don't value it as much as we need to. And the future generation is not going to have as deep a pool of resources to draw from. On top of that, they're going to have to clean up our mess. And it's not fair. It's fundamentally unfair. But we're also going to leave the next generation with technologies and knowledge. So, those are better than nothing. And also, these are all complicated issues. Everybody knows that. But there's a huge opportunity space here. And, when I say hope is great, you're right, hope is not a stretch. But, when I talk to young people who are involved in these kinds of things, like sitting next to me here, it's not blind hope, it's hope with a strategy, right? They're affecting change. They're reaching out to people and discussing how to build consensus, how to parlay their passion into action. And that's what we need to do, but I'm confident that there are enough people who care enough and are resourceful enough and ingenious enough to get us there. But it's not going to happen without a fight. So that's kind of the parallel reality that we have to live in. Yes, we can do it, and we have great intellect and passion and resourcefulness, but it's a big challenge. And let's not lose sight of it. It's going to take some work and some sacrifice. But the benefits are, well, what can you compare it to, really? Whether it's or not.
Yeah, I think you contextualized it right, that how can it not be the ethical question? Let's hear a little bit more from those who are going to be living in this world a few years longer than us. Abigail, what do you think about this ethical, political, how do you perceive this? That is there an ethical obligation for us to leave the planet as a better place, and what can we do?
I think that every generation really feels that they have an ethical obligation to leave the world better than they found it. And I think when it comes to climate change, that's a challenging topic because things are not necessarily better, but these previous generations have given our future generations a foundation, a place to start. They have given us the knowledge that we need to be able to build those lasting solutions and realize the changes that we need to take. And I think that our future generations are ready to take that foundation and the resources that we've been given, the technologies that we've developed to start seeing a more sustainable future.
Morgan?
I agree. I definitely think that there is an ethical obligation to pass on the environment better than we found it, so to speak. And I think that particularly now, I'd like to go back to something you said, that hope is not a strategy. And I think we see a lot of people getting very excited when they see a young person enter the climate discussion. Youth activists, we're all very excited when we see students who are speaking up. And I think what we have to remember is that we're still all in this together. These changes have to start happening now. And young people can't act on their own. We still need mentorship, we still need guidance, we still need everyone to be bought into this fight. So I absolutely agree that all generations have that obligation to continue making sure that the environment they're passing down is a good one to give to their children.
Okay, let's bring it back to our mass communication part a little bit. This is specifically for you. Climate scientists are now in consensus that human activities are the primary cause for current heating that's happening, global warming, or whichever name you want to call it. So what ethical responsibilities do the weather forecasters have to communicate facts like these to the people?
Personally, I totally disassociate myself from that. I forecast, that is what I do. I do not step into that realm. I know that may not go over well, but I do not. I am not a platform for anything. I don't prescribe, I don't tell anybody to go to a car dealership, to a particular car dealership to buy a car. I don't tell anybody to recycle. I don't tell anybody to do anything like that. I try to stay neutral in that regard. My message that I give as a forecaster is I forecast the weather. And so we have reporters that report, and we report on those topics. But I do not consider myself I'm not a news reporter. I'm a forecaster. So I stay in that regard, and that's what I do.
That's a pretty well played answer, yes. But I appreciate that you present the facts and then let the listeners, they interpret the fact in any which way they want. So at this point of time, I do have some more questions with me, but from the audience, is there any question that you would like to ask? Yes, there are 2 microphones here. If you can come up here, or if you have a loud voice, that'll work too.
Hello. Hi, I'm Drake. I'm from Columbia College, a sister college. I'm a minor major. My question is, with social media constantly advancing in like leaping ways, we've seen rise to new issues like fast fashion, things where they're just creating loads of clothes, advertising on social media, and anything that doesn't get used gets dumped in a desert somewhere. So the issue that proposes is kind of like we're always playing catch up with climate change. Are there any ways that we can take a more preemptive approach, like in legislation or education? How would you guys solve that first?
Any of you want to take that question?
So, only because I mentioned it earlier, there is this idea of a carbon fee and dividend, where producers of carbon pay additional taxes on the carbon they produce, and that gets collected and redistributed amongst the public as a dividend every year. And the public then has a choice about what they choose to consume. If they want to continue to choose to consume high carbon products, they'll pay more, and they don't necessarily reap a reward from that program. But if people choose to purchase goods that don't emit as much carbon into the atmosphere, they'll tend to get more money back from the dividend than they pay out, and so it ends up being a net benefit for most people. And a lot of people have run the numbers on this. I might just say that, a lot of us, when we're up here, whether we like it or not, we represent the institutions that we work for, and I'm no different. And everything that I'm saying here is from my perspective as a citizen, and not as a representative of the place that I work. Some people have a responsibility to protect the public, in terms of like weather forecasting, and maybe you don't want to risk turning a certain segment of the audience off if they're not going to like what you have to say politically, because part of your job is to protect people. And it's tough sometimes for people in positions like we're in to message this in a way that doesn't go back. And I speak for myself on that. But there are a lot of instruments. And people are getting creative at generating more of these instruments. I don't know what, you mentioned something about a bunch of shirts being dumped in the desert. I wasn't sure if I understood that quite correctly, but in terms of policy, there are good options on the table right now, and not enough people know about them. And even if that isn't the only one, but so this is another. The more people are aware and impassioned to pursue the information that's out there, the more people will inform themselves about what instruments there really are. And then they can talk to their elected representatives, not about this big thing like you support climate science, but do you support this particular piece of legislation? And that rolls up and becomes an avalanche. That can be very persuasive. Our elected officials, they need to feel the pressure from their constituents. It's not enough to just elect somebody who has a platform position and then expect them to just carry the ball all the way down the field. You got to keep walking through these people. You got to keep the pressure on them in a good way, but they need that.
If I may address just, I think what you're pointing at was kind of the consumerism of our society and how it's just we always want more and more and more, and it's just almost an obsession. Part of it comes from, again, what we consume, not only by what we do, but what we watch. I mean, we have this, and I know that I come from that source, working for the TV industry, but that's, I think, one of the bigger problems, is what we consume. What we watch on TV, what we watch on social media, what we watch, whatever we consume and digest in our lives that tell us what we should wear, what we should watch, what we should do, we have to become more aware of those things. And I don't know, that's a good question. I don't know how you would address that. Personally, I turn everything on. I don't watch it, I don't listen to it, I don't consume that. But that's me. You can't tell everybody to do that. So I don't know. It's just that's a very difficult question to try to address. How do you change people's habits that way when you have so many people that are trying to get you to consume more? Because that's how you make money. Is to you have people that's their sole job, is to try to get people to watch more and consume more. And I don't know how you would change how
How did your generation deal with it? I mean, how do you see it?
It's kind of hit and miss. It's a lot of what we consume as well. The more conservative press areas and conservative movement based on media they consume. So does this make this issue less of a social kind of thing, like you disagree with me, I disagree with you? Is it more of a brush up against the systems we've created, like capitalism and making money, or is it more social? Did I ask that well? Does that make sense?
I think there needs to be some kind of responsibility that we feel for what our actions, are what we're doing. And I don't think a lot of people understand what they're doing. I don't think a lot of people understand that when you buy so much that it has to go somewhere and it just becomes a waste. It's fascinating to me where I go to relatives that are in other states that are California, obviously, they don't recycle. It's just a habit that it's like putting on a seatbelt. It's a habit. I want to recycle. I recycle. I will be able to do more. I see places where they don't do that either. And it's just like, what? You don't recycle in this space? Well, nobody picks it up. And so it's like, it's frustrating. But, things like that, and I guess legislation can help with that. I'm not a huge fan of forcing people to do things. I'd much rather have people decide to do things. I think it's much more effective. And it's just that turning hearts towards those things. And how do you do that? How do you win the minds and hearts of people? I don't know, you have to be an example, and you have to be just persuasive in knowledge. You have to just teach. You have to let people learn that what you're doing impacts this world.
I think one thing that we have to keep in mind also is patience and perseverance. Those two keys go a long way. Think about changing social habits. Smoking was very fashionable. Marlboro Man was an iconic man in the 60s. Now he is not anymore. Because we have changed that habit. It did not happen in a day. It took maybe 30, 40 years. but it's possible. It's a persistent message, and I totally agree with you, Dirk. It's not a matter of imposing a law or saying, no, you cannot do this. It's not an imposition. People have to embrace that. In fact, in a personal experience, last week I was in Iceland, chasing northern lights. Arctic area, I mean, they call it Arctic wind for a reason. With 3 layers of pants and 4 layers of shirts and snow jackets and boots, it was bone chilling when the wind blows. And there in Reykjavik, they don't have those many cars as we have. People are not getting out from a heated garage into a heated car in that environment. Where are you going? Oh, so-and-so hotel. All right, we'll drop you at bus stop number 12. It's just a 5 minutes walk. You got 2 suitcases. That's okay, you can go. Sidewalks are not clean. There is snow, packed and packed and packed. Yeah, people are walking. People are living life out there, and they're doing it. They're not complaining about it. It's a matter of training your mind also and slowly reducing consumption. It's a process. It would not happen in a day. Morgan, Abigail, anything to add on this?
If I may, I think that part of your question is asking how much responsibility we have individually when it comes to climate change and how it's being caused. And to an extent, I agree with what has been said. We do have a responsibility personally to try and live our lives to be as environmentally friendly as possible. But this problem goes beyond that. It won't be solved just by all of us making some lifestyle changes. In the end, it's going to have to come from legislative change. It's going to have to come from sweeping changes at the state and national level that are addressing and putting more regulations on companies that are causing a very large part of this problem. So I think that it is incredibly important to make individual changes because we do have a responsibility, but it's also important to remember that that's not going to be the entire solution, that we do actually have to have change coming from higher levels.
I agree with Morgan. I think that, and what everyone has had to say, that as you mentioned, there are two parts to this. There's legislative action and there's educational action. And climate change is a hard topic to tackle, and you can make changes, right? You can educate people and you can say that you need to recycle more, you can reduce the impacts of fast fashion, I think as you mentioned, by doing things like thrifting, and those are activities that we at Enox are working to encourage and to educate. But I think at the end of the day, as Morgan said, to make real national, global impacts, legislation does have to be a part of the conversation.
This is a great topic. Thank you so much. I think there's another person waiting. You have another question on this? Let's give her a chance.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to word my question while they were up. But I'm kind of piggybacking off of what they said and what has been said. And I was wondering, do you guys think that, so it's no secret that like the political parties can't even agree if climate change is a thing, when we know that it is a thing, it's been happening. But do you think that until we can get people to agree on the national level, that we can have any sort of legislative or even personal action to help, I don't know how to phrase it, like defeat, that's not the right word, but like stop climate change?
Anyone want to take a stab at that?
If I'm interpreting your question correctly, I think that yes, there has to be a point where everyone is going to have to come together and accept climate change, but I think that there are still ways that we can help reduce the impacts of climate change, even if everyone doesn't agree, because there is a great part of the population and a great part of the younger generations who do see climate change as a real issue and something that is extremely important, and we can make adjustments, we can make changes now to help reduce those impacts, even if it can't be something that we agree on at the national level. That doesn't mean that we can't make changes to decrease the impact of climate change, if that helps answer.
I kind of have a follow-up to that. How
much do you think of the denying of climate change comes from, like, people like big corporations who don't want to take the steps to stop climate change, who don't want to have to put in the money or the effort or the labor to put into climate change? How much of that is influencing the rest of the country that doesn't believe in it or doesn't want to believe in it?
Well, I think that the denial of climate change, there are a lot of different things that can come into that, but really, when you talk about people who maybe don't accept climate change, it's an educational thing. And as a journalist myself, I know that there is a lot of misinformation out there, especially with the way that media is, and I think that maybe consumerism and large companies might have an impact on the denial of climate change, but the bigger impact is the fact that we have people who are not educated enough to really understand that it is an issue. And so in order to help solve that, you have to start at my level, right, as a high school student, and start learning about it and being educated about it through
I think we are really running short of time at this point of time. I do have some questions from the web. Those were the YouTube watchers. And we don't have time to go through all of that. I'm told that our time is up. It's 8:44. But I have to acknowledge at least one viewer from the YouTube channels. Jeff, you are seeing it. Jeff Tolhurst. Good to see your question, Jeff. And I expect a question like this from you. I just read this question. I don't think we have time to respond to it. It's from my colleague in the Sonora Columbia College. I read about vapor pressure deficit in terms of climate change and wildfires. Can you explain what this term means, why it is significant, and the impacts of increasing vapor pressure deficit? I have not heard this term. And Jeff introduces me to many more new terms. Jeff Tolhurst, you, of course, you have an answer for that.
Except we didn't have time for this.
I don't think we have enough time for this. I'll give you Jeff Tolhurst. Jeff, I'll give the other Jeff your phone number and you can chat about it as long as you want.
Is anybody interested? Yes, okay.
Okay, then let's go on. Okay, Jeff, you're in luck.
The atmosphere is a collection of gases. Each gas exerts a partial pressure. If you sum them all up, you get the total pressure in the atmosphere. Among those gases in the atmosphere is water vapor. Okay, so they call that a vapor pressure. Now, if you put a lot of water vapor molecules into the atmosphere, eventually they will start to stick together and they'll form little droplets. And that's called condensation, and that's where we get our clouds. You can either force more water vapor molecules into the atmosphere to bring up the vapor pressure, or you can change the temperature. If you cool the temperature down, the collisions between those water vapor molecules kind of become more sluggish, and they're more likely to stick together. That's why you get fog when it cools down at night. You can also add water vapor to the air in your bathroom when you take a shower, and you see fog form when it's warm. So the vapor pressure deficit is really a measure of how far you are away from forming a cloud. The larger the vapor pressure deficit, the drier the air is. And the woods in the fuels respond pretty quickly to relative humidity, the amount of water vapor that's in the air. So that's kind of where that all comes from. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. It is time to close. I think I was given a time of 8:45. It's 8:46 now, as I'm seeing, or 8:47. I thought I ran this college, but sometimes when Steve comes up and says, hey, Dr. B, cut it out, I got busy to Steve. A big hand for our panelists. You did a great job. Events like this are not possible without audience participation. You have been a very patient audience. You have showed up here today. As the days go by, I would expect that more of you would come back to the college. The campus is open. We take a variety of precautions to keep this campus safe and clean. And I tell everybody that the air that I breathe in my home, that is not as good quality as we breathe in this auditorium, because of the air handling capabilities that we have and the cleaning that goes on in this campus. So going forward, we would have many other events from MAPS. My sincere thanks to MAPS for organizing this event and bringing these topics to the forum, to the community, and having an engaging discussion on that. We may not agree on everything. It's not necessary that we agree on everything, but we all need to stay informed, be informed, engage in a debate and discussion. So my sincere thanks to all of you who have come here, and I hope to see you in the future, either in this event, any other MAPS event, or any other activity that we conduct in the college. On behalf of MJC, it has been my pleasure to host this event. Steve, do I have your permission to start it off, or? Thank you so much. Have a safe night. Have a great weekend.